My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old now. I never believed that one ordinary decision could split a life into before and after. Not dramatically, not with thunder or screaming or doors slammed shut, but quietly like a thin crack forming in glass. You don't notice it at first. You still drink from the glass, still trust it, until one day it shatters in your hands. This is my story. And it starts on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday in my life. I was 34 years old, married for 11 years, living in a house that everyone admired. White walls, big windows, a small garden I pretended to love. From the outside, my life was safe, stable, respectable. Inside, it felt like I was slowly disappearing. That morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I remember touching the faint line between my eyebrows, the one that appeared when I worried too much. It wasn't always there. Neither was the heaviness in my chest. Get it together, I whispered to my reflection. Behind me, the house was silent. Too silent for a family home. No laughter, no arguments, no music. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hallway, counting something down I didn't yet understand. My husband, Mark, had already left for work. He always left early now. He used to kiss my forehead before going, sometimes linger in the doorway just to look at me. That stopped years ago. At some point, we became two polite strangers sharing responsibilities and memories instead of a life. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything. Photos of other people's happiness passed by. Vacations, anniversaries, smiling couples. I wondered when I stopped posting. There was a message notification I hadn't opened yet. Unknown sender. Are you still thinking about what you said last night? My fingers froze. I stared at the screen, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. I knew who it was. I had known the moment the notification appeared, before I even read it. The question wasn't who. The question was why had I let it happen? His name was Daniel. And no, this wasn't supposed to be that kind of story. At least not at first. I met Daniel 6 months earlier at a work conference. I almost didn't go. Mark had been distant, exhausted, uninterested in anything beyond routine. I felt invisible at home, and work was the only place where I still felt useful. Daniel wasn't extraordinary in the way movies describe men. He wasn't impossibly handsome or overly charming. He was attentive. That was it. He listened when I spoke, really listened. He asked questions and waited for the answers. The first time we talked, I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to exist again. We exchanged emails for work reasons. Then messages. Then long conversations that slipped from professional to personal without either of us pushing. I told myself it was harmless. Just words. Just connection. But words can change you. By the time that message appeared on my phone that Tuesday morning, Daniel knew things about me that my husband didn't. My fears. My regrets. The quiet loneliness I carried like a secret illness. And last night I had crossed a line I had sworn I never would. It wasn't physical. Not yet. But it was honest in a way that scared me. I don't think I've been happy for a long time, I had written to him. Sometimes I wonder if this is all my life will ever be. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't judge. He simply replied, "You deserve more than surviving." Now, staring at his message in my quiet kitchen, I realized something terrifying. I wanted to answer. I thought of Mark. Of our wedding photos still hanging in the hallway. Of promises made when we were younger, braver, more hopeful. I thought of the life I had built carefully, brick by brick, even when it stopped feeling like home. And then I thought of myself. When was the last time someone asked me what I wanted? I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed again. Yes, I finally wrote. I haven't stopped thinking about it. The moment I sent it, my hands started shaking. I didn't know then that this small exchange, this quiet confession between two people sitting alone in different houses, would unravel everything. That it would force me to face choices I had avoided for years. That it would test my morality, my courage, and my idea of love itself. At noon, I met my friend Sarah for lunch. She took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. "What's going on with you?" she asked. "You look different." I laughed too quickly. "Different how?" "Like you're standing on the edge of something." Her words sent a chill through me. "Just tired," I said. "Life stuff." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, Em. You've been quiet lately. Quiet people tend to explode. I smiled, but inside I felt exposed. That night, Mark came home late. We ate dinner in front of the TV, barely speaking. At one point, he reached for the salt and our hands brushed accidentally. He pulled away as if he'd touched something hot. I watched him, really watched him, and felt grief rise unexpectedly. Not anger. Not hatred. Grief for what we had lost without even noticing. In bed, he fell asleep quickly, his back turned to me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my phone glowing softly on the nightstand. Daniel had sent another message. I don't want to be a mistake in your life, he wrote. But I don't want to pretend this connection isn't real either. I closed my eyes. Neither did I. That night, for the first time in years, I cried silently beside the man I had promised forever to. Not because I was in love with someone else, but because I had finally admitted to myself that I was deeply, painfully unhappy. And once you name the truth, it doesn't let you go. This was only the beginning. In the next part, I'll tell you about the choice I thought would bring clarity, and how it instead pulled me deeper into a storm I never expected. The days after that Tuesday passed in a strange blur. Like I was living slightly outside my own body. I went to work, answered emails, smiled at coworkers, cooked dinner, nodded during conversations, all the motions of a normal life, but inside, everything felt unstable. As if one wrong step could cause the ground beneath me to collapse. Daniel didn't pressure me. That somehow made it harder. Instead of constant messages, he sent fewer, but each one carried weight. I've been thinking about you. How are you really today? You don't have to explain yourself to me. Those words followed me everywhere. They echoed in my head while I stood in the shower, while I folded laundry, while I lay next to Mark at night listening to his steady breathing. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without being evaluated. At the same time, guilt began to creep in. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. It sat in my chest like a dull ache. I hadn't cheated. Not technically. But I knew I was betraying something. Or maybe admitting it had already been broken. Mark and I had our first real conversation in months that Friday evening. He came home earlier than usual, dropped his keys on the counter, and stood there for a moment like he wasn't sure where to go. I noticed things I hadn't in a long time. The tired slump of his shoulders, the faint lines near his eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me. "Can we talk?" he asked. My heart jumped. For a split second, I wondered if he knew. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. We sat at the dining table, the same place where we once planned vacations and laughed over cheap wine. Now it felt like a negotiation room. "I've been thinking," he began, rubbing his hands together. "We're not great, are we?" The question hung between us. "No," I said honestly. "We're not." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. "I don't know when it happened," he said. "But I feel like we stopped trying." I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to tell him how lonely I felt, how invisible, how much I had needed him and how long I'd waited. But the words stuck. Instead, I said quietly, "I feel the same." Silence followed. He looked relieved, and that hurt more than anger would have. "Maybe we should go to counseling," he said. "Or figure out what we want." I agreed. What else could I do? That night, as I lay awake, I wondered if this conversation would have happened if Daniel didn't exist. If I would have found the courage to admit the truth without someone else reminding me I deserved more than emotional starvation. The next morning, Daniel asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. Just coffee. I stared at the message for a long time. Every responsible voice in my head screamed no. Every honest part of me whispered yes. I told myself I needed clarity. That was the lie I used to justify it. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from where anyone I knew would go. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He stood up as soon as he saw me, not smiling, not rushing, just present. Seeing him in person felt different. More dangerous. "How are you?" he asked. I opened my mouth and almost said, "Fine." Instead, the truth slipped out. Confused. He nodded. "Me too." We talked for 2 hours. About everything and nothing. About work, childhood memories, books we loved, the kind of lives we thought we'd have by our 30s. He didn't flirt. He didn't touch me. He just listened. At one point he said, "I don't want to be an escape for you." That sentence hit harder than any confession. I don't want to escape, I replied. I want to understand why I feel like I'm drowning. He looked at me for a long moment. Sometimes drowning happens quietly, he said. No one notices until you stop moving. When we stood to leave, my hands were shaking. Outside the air was cold. We stood awkwardly for a moment, neither of us ready to go. I should go, I said. I know, he replied. Then, impulsively, stupidly, I hugged him. It lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds that changed everything. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was gentle, human. And when we pulled apart, I felt something inside me break open. That night I told Mark I wanted space. Not separation. Not divorce. Space. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He simply nodded, eyes tired. Okay, he said. If that's what you need. His acceptance felt like abandonment, and I hated myself for feeling that way. I moved into the guest room. From there, everything accelerated. Daniel and I started talking daily. Still no physical line crossed, but emotionally, I was already somewhere else. I started imagining a different life. One where I didn't have to shrink myself to keep the peace. Then came the message that forced my hand. I can't keep pretending this doesn't mean something, Daniel wrote. But I won't be the reason you lie to yourself. That night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the walls of the house I had once been proud of. I realized something terrifying. No matter what I chose next, staying or leaving, someone was going to get hurt. And for the first time, I understood that the person I had hurt the most for years was myself. In the next part, I'll tell you about the decision I finally made, and the consequences that followed immediately after. The night after Daniel's message, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either, not at first. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling. Every creak felt louder than it should have been. Like the walls themselves were aware that something fundamental was about to change. By morning, my body felt heavy, but my mind was sharp in a painful way. There was no fog left. No confusion. Just fear, clear focus fear. Fear of staying. Fear of leaving. Fear of choosing wrong and living with it for the rest of my life. Mark left early for work. Before he closed the door, he paused. Are you okay? He asked softly. I almost said yes. The habit was automatic. Instead, I said, I don't know. He nodded once, like he accepted that answer more than any reassurance I could have offered. Then he left. I spent that day doing something I hadn't done in years. I told the truth, but only to myself. I wrote everything down. Not in a neat, organized way. Just raw, messy sentences. What I missed. What I resented. What I was afraid to admit. What I still loved. What I didn't. Page after page, the same pattern appeared. With Mark, I felt safe but unseen. With Daniel, I felt alive but unstable. And the hardest realization of all, I wasn't choosing between two men. I was choosing between two versions of myself. The woman who learned how to survive by adapting, and the woman who was finally asking for more. That evening, Mark came home later than usual. I heard his car pull into the driveway and felt my heart start racing. I knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, leaving a careful space between us. I think, I began slowly, that we've been postponing something for a long time. He didn't interrupt. I don't know when we stopped being honest, I continued. But I know I haven't been. Not with you. Not with myself. He swallowed hard. Is there someone else? He asked quietly. The question I had dreaded. The one I had rehearsed answering in my head 100 different ways. Yes, I said. Not the way you're thinking. But emotionally, yes. He closed his eyes. I knew, he said after a moment. I didn't want to know. But I knew. Tears finally came then. Not dramatic sobs, just a slow, steady release. For both of us. I never meant to hurt you, I said. I know, he replied. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. We talked for hours. About everything we avoided. About how we became roommates instead of partners. About how neither of us felt chosen anymore. There was no yelling. No accusations. Just grief. At some point he asked, do you want to leave? The question felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know I can't keep living like this. He nodded. Again, that quiet acceptance that broke my heart. Then maybe, he said, we should stop pretending this is temporary. That night we agreed to separate, not legally, not yet. Just physically. Space, real space this time. I packed a suitcase with shaking hands. Clothes, toiletries, a few books. When I reached for my wedding photo, I froze. Then I left it behind. I stayed at a small rented apartment a friend helped me find. The first night there, I sat on the floor because I hadn't unpacked yet, eating takeout straight from the container. Felt lonely and free. Daniel didn't celebrate my decision. He didn't rush me into anything. When I told him, he simply said, "Thank you for choosing honesty." We met a few days later. This time, everything felt different. He looked at me not with excitement but with concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Some moments I feel strong. Others terrified." "That's normal," he said. "You just dismantled your entire life." We walked through a park, the leaves already starting to change color. I noticed how quiet my mind felt next to him. Not empty, just calm. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask him questions I'd been afraid to. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He stopped walking. "I want you to choose yourself," he said. "Even if that doesn't include me." That answer scared me more than any declaration of love could have. Because it meant he wasn't trying to rescue me. I had to stand on my own. As weeks passed, reality set in. Friends asked questions I didn't know how to answer. My family sensed something was wrong. Nights alone became both peaceful and unbearable. I missed Mark, not romantically but deeply. The shared history, the familiarity, the comfort of being known. At the same time, I started noticing changes in myself. I laughed more easily, I spoke more honestly, I felt my emotions instead of suppressing them. Daniel and I grew closer, slowly, cautiously. No illusions. No promises. And yet, doubt crept in. What if this was just an escape? What if I destroyed something stable for something temporary? What if I realized too late that love isn't supposed to feel intense, just safe? One evening, alone in the apartment, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked different. Not happier. Not sadder. Just awake. That's when I understood something crucial. This story wasn't about romance anymore. It was about identity. And I was standing at the beginning of a version of myself I had never met before. One who would have to live with the consequences of choosing truth over comfort. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment everything collided. When the past demanded answers, and the future stopped waiting quietly. I thought the hardest part would be leaving. I was wrong. The hardest part was living in the aftermath. The quiet, unstructured space where there was no clear right or wrong anymore. Just consequences unfolding slowly, deliberately, like a tide that didn't care whether I was ready. The first real collision came from my family. My mother noticed immediately. She always did. "You sound different," she said on the phone one evening. "Where are you calling from?" I hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. "I moved out," I said finally. Silence. Then, "Why?" That single word carried years of expectations. Marriage meant permanence to her. Endurance. Compromise at all costs. "I wasn't happy," I said. Another silence, heavier this time. "Happiness isn't the point," she replied. "Commitment is." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just listened, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on my chest. After the call, I cried, not because I regretted my decision, but because I realized how alone I truly was in it. Mark called a few days later. Not to reconcile. To ask about paperwork. "I'll send you the documents we need to review," he said, professional, distant. Then he paused. "I hope you're okay." The kindness in his voice shattered something in me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know," he replied. "I just wish sorry could rewind time." When the call ended, I sat on the floor again, the same spot where I had eaten takeout weeks earlier, and finally allowed myself to grieve fully. Not just him. The future we planned. The children we never had. The version of myself that believed love meant staying quiet to keep the peace. Grief came in waves. Some days it knocked the air out of me. Other days it felt distant, manageable. Daniel was there, but carefully. He never tried to replace what I lost. He never minimized it. I don't want to be your landing place, he said once. I want to meet you after you've landed. That sentence stayed with me. Then came the doubt. It arrived quietly, disguised as reason. What if I made a mistake? What if I confused emotional neglect with absence of love? What if this pain was the price of impatience? Late at night, alone, those questions grew louder. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, I went to Mark's place to pick up some remaining things. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. We stood awkwardly in the doorway, both unsure whether to hug, speak, or retreat. You look different, he said. So do you. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we had once planned our wedding. I keep wondering, he said slowly, if we could have fixed this. The question pierced me. Maybe, I replied honestly, but only if we had both admitted we were unhappy. And you think we were? Yes, I said without hesitation. He looked down. I think I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I really looked at you, I'd realize I was failing you. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't need perfection, I said. I needed presence. We sat there, suspended in the truth we had avoided for years. When I left that night, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not relief. Acceptance. A few weeks later, Daniel and I crossed the physical line we had been circling for months. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate, and terrifying in its tenderness. Afterwards, lying next to him, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. This doesn't erase anything, I said softly. I know, he replied. It just adds a new chapter. That night I dreamed of my old life. Not with regret but with distance. Like watching someone else's memories. Still, the external pressure intensified. Friends took sides. Some drifted away. Others asked invasive questions disguised as concern. Was he worth it? Do you think this will last? Aren't you afraid you'll regret it? I stopped answering, because the truth was I didn't know, and I was finally okay with that. I started therapy. Real therapy. Not surface-level coping strategies but deep excavation. Patterns emerged. I learned how early I had learned to shrink. How being easy to love became my identity. How conflict terrified me more than loneliness. The therapist asked me one question that changed everything. When was the last time you chose yourself without needing permission? I couldn't answer. Daniel didn't become my solution. He became my mirror. He challenged me when I avoided discomfort. He stepped back when I leaned too heavily. He didn't rescue me from the weight of my choices. That made this real. And terrifying. Then came the moment I hadn't prepared for. Mark told me he was dating someone. The news hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted him back, but because it made everything irreversible. I cried that night. Not out of jealousy but out of finality. A door had closed, and no amount of honesty could reopen it. I stood in my apartment, surrounded by boxes still unpacked, and understood something crucial. Freedom doesn't feel light at first. Feels heavy, because now every choice belongs to you. And in the next part, I'll tell you about the decision that forced me to confront my deepest fear. The possibility that choosing myself might mean standing alone. Mark telling me he was dating someone didn't end my feelings. It reorganized them. That's the part people don't talk about. You don't stop caring just because a chapter closes. You don't suddenly feel replaced or relieved or victorious. What you feel is a strange mixture of grief, gratitude, and humility, the understanding that something meaningful existed, and now it belongs to the past. I didn't tell Daniel right away. Not because I was hiding it, but because I needed to understand what it meant to me first. That night, I walked aimlessly through the city. No destination. No headphones. Just the sound of traffic and footsteps and my own thoughts catching up to me. I realized I was afraid, not of being alone, but of being honest about how deeply this transition affected me. Because if I admitted it hurt, would that mean I made the wrong choice? I sat on a bench near the river and watched the water move steadily forward, unconcerned with what it left behind. That image stayed with me. The next day, I told Daniel. He listened without interruption, without defensiveness. I didn't expect it to hit me like this, I admitted. I'm not jealous. I'm just confronted. With what? He asked gently. With the fact that the past doesn't wait for us to feel ready, I said. He nodded. Neither does the future. That was when I understood something important about him. And about us. Daniel wasn't afraid of my complexity, but he also wasn't willing to absorb it for me. A few days later, my mother came to visit. She walked through my apartment slowly, observing everything, the unpacked boxes, the minimal furniture, the way nothing felt permanent yet. "So this is where you live now," she said. "For now," I replied. She sat down, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I raised you to finish what you start," she said. "Not to walk away when things get hard." I took a breath. "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "But you didn't teach me how to be honest with myself." She looked at me sharply. "That sounds selfish." "Maybe," I replied calmly. But staying silent was destroying me. The conversation didn't end in agreement. It ended in understanding. Incomplete, fragile, but real. That night, I cried again. Not because I doubted myself, but because growth isolates you before it connects you. Around this time, something unexpected happened. Daniel started pulling back. Not dramatically. Subtly. Fewer messages. Shorter calls. More space. At first, panic rose in me instinctively, the old fear of abandonment rearing its head. Then I stopped myself. This wasn't avoidance. This was boundaries. When I asked him about it, he didn't deflect. "I don't want us to build something on the ruins of what you just survived," he said. "I want you stable, not grateful." That sentence unsettled me, because a part of me was leaning on him more than I realized. I had left one structure, and was subconsciously trying to place another beneath me too quickly. That realization forced me into something I hadn't planned on. Standing alone. Really alone. No marriage safety net. No emotional replacement. No narrative to explain myself to others. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't try to escape it. I spent weekends by myself. Learned which silences were peaceful, and which were unresolved. I cooked meals I liked without compromise. I rearranged the apartment not for aesthetics, but for comfort. I began noticing how often I used to ask for permission. Even internally. Is this okay? Am I allowed to feel this way? Does this make me a bad person? Therapy sessions dug deeper. We talked about how I learned early that love required self-erasure. How praise came when I was agreeable, not expressive. How I confused harmony with intimacy. My therapist said something that stayed with me. Your fear isn't being alone. Your fear is being fully seen and still left. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. I had spent years making myself smaller to avoid that risk. Daniel wasn't the antidote to that fear. He was the catalyst. One evening, weeks later, we met again. This time, there was no tension. Just warmth. We talked honestly, about expectations, about pace, about uncertainty. "I don't need guarantees," I told him. "I need authenticity." He smiled softly. "That's all I can offer." And for the first time, I believed that was enough. Still, something remained unresolved. A question I hadn't yet faced. Was I choosing Daniel? Or was I choosing the woman I became after leaving? Because those are not the same thing. And until I answered that, I knew I couldn't move forward without repeating old patterns. The answer didn't come immediately, but it was forming. Slowly. Quietly. Like everything real does. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment I finally confronted that question, and what it cost me to answer it honestly. The question followed me everywhere. Not loudly. Not insistently. It simply waited. Was I choosing Daniel? Or was I choosing myself? For weeks, I tried to avoid answering it. I told myself I didn't need to label anything yet. That healing wasn't linear. That clarity would arrive when it was ready. But the truth doesn't disappear just because you don't interrogate it. It sits in the background, patient and unmoved, until one day it steps directly into your path and refuses to let you pass. That day came in the most unremarkable way possible. A Sunday afternoon. Rain tapping lightly against the windows. No plans. No distractions. Just time. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, sorting through old boxes I had avoided since moving. Not essentials, the emotional leftovers. Papers, photos, objects that once felt important and now felt heavy. That's when I found my wedding journal. I had forgotten it existed. A small notebook, cream-colored, with my handwriting from over a decade ago. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, debating whether to open it. Then I did. Page after page, I met a younger version of myself. Hopeful, earnest, afraid, though she didn't know it yet. I had written about what I wanted my marriage to feel like. Safe, supportive, enduring. But nowhere did I write alive. Nowhere did I write seen. That omission felt like a quiet confession. I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest, grief rising unexpectedly. Not for the marriage, but for the girl who didn't know she was allowed to want more. That night, I dreamed I was standing in a house with no walls. Everything was exposed. Every thought, every fear, every contradiction. When I woke up, my heart was racing. I realized I had been constructing emotional walls my entire life. Not to keep people out, but to avoid being fully visible. That's when it hit me. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being known, and still rejected. And that fear had guided nearly every decision I had ever made, including love. Daniel didn't cause that fear. He triggered it. Because with him, I couldn't hide behind politeness or obligation or longevity. He saw me as I was becoming, not as who I had been. And that terrified me. I didn't tell him this right away. Instead, I pulled back. Not in distance, but in reliance. I stopped reaching for him when I felt uncertain. I sat with discomfort instead of outsourcing it. I let days pass without constant reassurance. And something unexpected happened. I didn't fall apart. I didn't disappear. I became sturdier. That scared me too. Because if I could stand on my own, what did that mean for us? A few weeks later, Mark called. It wasn't about paperwork this time. I think I need closure, he said. We met at a neutral place, a quiet cafe neither of us had history with. He looked different. Lighter somehow. Not happier, just more present. I don't want to get back together, he said immediately. I just want to understand. I nodded. Me too. We talked for a long time. About the small resentments that grew unchecked. About how we both avoided conflict until silence became our primary language. About how love, without curiosity, slowly calcifies. I don't think either of us was wrong, he said. I think we were just unfinished. That word again. Unfinished. When we said goodbye, there was no bitterness left. Just respect. And a quiet understanding that we had given each other everything we were capable of at the time. Walking home, I felt something settle inside me. That chapter was truly closed. And without it, there was nowhere left to hide. Daniel noticed the shift immediately. You're different, he said one evening. More grounded. I think I finally stopped negotiating with myself, I replied. He smiled, but there was hesitation there too. That's when I realized something else. He had been waiting, not for me to choose him, but for me to choose from a place of wholeness. That night, I asked him the question I had been avoiding. What happens if I decide I need more time on my own? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, then I'll respect it, even if it disappoints me. That honesty took my breath away, because it meant this wasn't about possession. It was about alignment. And alignment doesn't demand sacrifice of self. It demands clarity. For days after that conversation, I felt unsettled, raw, exposed. Because clarity has a cost. It removes excuses. It removes distractions. It leaves you face to face with your own responsibility. I went back to therapy with a new urgency. We talked about attachment, about how I equated love with endurance, about how I learned early that being low maintenance made me lovable. My therapist asked me something simple and devastating. If Daniel disappeared tomorrow, who would you be? The answer came without hesitation. Myself. That's when I knew. I wasn't choosing him to complete me. I was choosing myself and allowing him to walk beside me. That distinction mattered more than anything. I told him the next time we met. I don't want to build a future because I'm afraid to stand alone, I said. I want to build it because I can stand alone. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, that's the only way I'd want to be chosen. Still, one final fear lingered. What if choosing myself meant eventually choosing no one? What if independence became isolation? What if this strength hardened me instead of opening me? Those questions didn't disappear, but they softened, because for the first time I trusted myself enough to live without guarantees. And that trust changed everything. In the final part, I'll tell you about the moment I stopped searching for certainty, and how letting go of the need to be sure allowed me to finally feel at peace. I used to believe peace was something you arrived at. A destination, a conclusion, a place where all the questions finally stopped asking to be answered. I was wrong. Peace isn't an arrival. It's a decision you make over and over again, especially when certainty refuses to show up. After everything I had unraveled, examined, and rebuilt, I expected some kind of emotional resolution. A clear sense of this is right. A moment where the weight lifted completely. That moment never came. What came instead was quieter. I stopped waking up anxious. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head before conversations that hadn't happened yet. I stopped asking myself who I needed to be to deserve the life I wanted. And slowly, without realizing it at first, I stopped needing permission from my past, from my family, from society, from fear. Daniel and I didn't rush forward. We didn't make grand declarations or long-term promises wrapped in certainty. We chose presence. We chose honesty. We chose to let the relationship grow without demanding it justify the choices that led us there. Some days that felt enough. Other days it scared me deeply. But I learned something essential. Fear doesn't mean wrong. It means unfamiliar. There was a moment, small but significant, that confirmed this for me. I was at a bookstore one afternoon, standing in front of a shelf labeled Personal Growth. I laughed quietly to myself. A year ago I would have rolled my eyes at it. Now I found myself pulling out a book and flipping through its pages without judgment. One sentence caught my attention. The bravest people aren't the ones who know where they're going. They're the ones willing to walk without guarantees. I stood there for a long time. That sentence felt like a mirror. My relationship with my family changed. Not dramatically, but honestly. My mother still didn't fully understand my choice. But she saw the difference in me. She saw that I wasn't fragile. That I wasn't lost. One day she said quietly, "You seem steadier." It wasn't approval, but it was respect. And that was enough. Mark eventually stopped being a wound and became a memory. A meaningful one. I learned how to hold gratitude without guilt. I could acknowledge what we had without wishing it had been different. That chapter taught me endurance. This one taught me alignment. Both mattered. Daniel and I still have difficult conversations, still negotiate space, still choose each other consciously rather than habitually. Some people might call that unstable. Call it awake. Because love, I've learned, isn't proven by how long you stay. It's revealed by how honestly you show up. There are days I imagine the life I could have had if I stayed. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It simply exists as one possible path among many. And for the first time in my life, I don't need to measure my choices against imagined alternatives. This life is mine. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. You can love deeply and still choose yourself. You can walk away without being a villain. You can honor the past without living inside it. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop asking whether you're allowed to want more, and start building a life that doesn't require you to disappear. This isn't a story about betrayal. It's a story about awakening. And it doesn't end here. Because the moment you choose yourself honestly, that's where everything truly begins.